Okay, thank you very much. So I'd like to welcome everyone to today's meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. That's both those who are participating and to those who are watching at home. I'll run through a few housekeeping points before we start. And if you have any technical difficulties during the meeting, then please contact the Democratic Services Officer on call who will attempt to assist you. Today's officer on call is Charles, and the number is 577186, and I believe that will appear in the chat box. I would ask participants, when you are not speaking, please mute your microphone. This minimises background noise and will help everyone to listen into the proceedings. Microphones must only be on if the participant has been granted permission to speak. And to gain my permission to speak, please very briefly indicate on the chat on the right-hand side of the screen, and I will then make a note and go back to you once the person speaking has finished. With everyone present, please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and that they are not used to make or receive phone calls while the meeting is in progress. Please also refrain from checking emails or conducting other business, and ensure that you are in a quiet room, free from distractions for the duration of the meeting. Please note this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and will be subsequently broadcast on the internet. Right, please can I ask members of the committee to confirm they are present in the meeting when I read out your name. I will ask for the attendance of those councillors who are participating in order to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1 separately. So I'll run through the list. Councillor Dexter. I can see you there.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
I'm here.
Hello there. All right. Councillor Boyd.
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Councillor Crittenden.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Curry.
Here, Chair.
Thanks. Councillor Duckworth.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Pat Moore. No, I can't see Councillor Moore. Councillor Shrub.
Here, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Towning.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. I've not received any requests from other councillors to speak under 20.1, but are there any members here who would like to speak under 20.1? No. Okay, thank you. So we move on to apologies for absence. And I've had apologies from Councillor Cupp, Councillor Braidwood and Councillor Pugh, for whom Councillor Rattigan is a substitute. Councillor Rattigan, you're here? You just confirm.
Good afternoon, Chair. I'm here.
Thank you very much. Are there any other apologies at all?
Yes, Chair. Apologies received from Councillor Pat Moore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we move on to the next item 2, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from anybody here? No. Okay, thank you. And item 3 is minutes of previous meeting. And there are, in fact, 2 previous meeting minutes to approve here. They approve the minutes of the meetings held on the 25th of November and the 10th of February, copies which were attached to the agenda pack. So I'm going to propose acceptance of those minutes. Could I ask Councillor Dexter to second them, please?
I'll second, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And unless I hear any objection, I'll take those as approved. So there is no objection. Thank you. So item 4 is the quarterly internal audit update report. And I'm going to ask Mr. Webb to introduce this report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members.
This is our regular quarterly internal audit update report, which summarises the work undertaken by the East Kent Audit Partnership on your behalf in the last quarter, together with the performance of the team up to the 31st of December 2020. If I could draw your attention to the table on page 15, that summarises the 9 new pieces of audit work undertaken during this quarter. We were pleased to conclude substantial assurance in 5 areas. They were housing benefit subsidy and housing benefit overpayments, both of which are administered on your behalf by EKS and Civica. We also concluded substantial assurance in the areas of external funding protocol, members' allowances and expenses, and disabled facility grants. 2 areas where we concluded reasonable assurance were the COVID-19 discretionary grant scheme, the administration of that, and also cemeteries and crematoria. The last 2 pieces of work undertaken in the last quarter weren't assurance pieces of work. One was the housing benefit quarterly testing for quarters 1 and 2 of 2021, where we sample housing benefit transactions to ensure that they are being processed correctly, and also a data match to identify any potential areas of fraud in the business grants administered by the council in respect of COVID-19. An important part of internal audit work is follow-up. Approximately 3 to 6 months after the conclusion of each new audit assignment, we go back and undertake a follow-up to ensure that the recommendations that have been agreed by management have been implemented. And details of those follow-ups undertaken in the last quarter are detailed in the table on page 25 of the agenda. We undertook 2 follow-ups during this period. Both of them, the original assurance level was reasonable, and the revised assurance level was reasonable as well. The areas under review were the member code of conduct and standards arrangements, and also absence management of staff, which is administered on the council's behalf by the East Kent HR Partnership. Attached to the report on page 28 onwards is Annex 1, which shows progress against the agreed 2021 audit plan up to the 31st of December. We've got a slight muddle with Annex 2 and 3. Unfortunately, they're the wrong way round on the agenda pack. Apologies for that, members. On page 32, we actually have Appendix 3, which it would be a summary of any critical or high priority recommendations still outstanding at the time of follow-up. There's none to report this quarter, as all have been implemented. Appendix 2 is the definition of the audit assurance statements. I mentioned earlier that 5 of the audits had concluded substantial assurance and 2 reasonable assurance. In terms of what that means, that's defined for you in Appendix 2. And actually, we use the CIPFA recommended assurance statement definitions. We also have definitions of the priority for recommendations: critical, high, medium, and low. That's on page 33 of your agenda pack. On page 35, we have at Appendix 4 a list of those areas where we still need to go back and follow up, where the assurance level at the time of the original audit was either limited or nil. That is to keep those items on your radar to let you know that we will be going back to follow them up in due course. Your final appendix, which is Appendix 5, and that's on pages 36 and 37, that's a balanced scorecard of performance indicators for the East Kent Audit Partnership team. For example, on page 36, we have chargeable days as a percentage of planned days, which shows you what percentage of the agreed plan we have delivered up to the 31st of December. There's also indicators in there in terms of the cost per audit day, the amount of follow-ups we've undertaken. We issue a client satisfaction questionnaire at the end of each audit, and on page 37 you can see details of the feedback from clients, which is always very encouraging. And also performance indicators surrounding the qualifications of staff, and also CPD for members of staff. That concludes my presentation, Chair. Obviously, very happy to take any questions that members may have on the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I don't see anybody asking to raise any questions in the chat. I did have one quick one myself, if I may, which is about the items in Appendix 4 that were outstanding, including the street cleansing, building control, planning apps, income and Section 106 agreements. You mentioned that they'll be completed in due course. Can you just confirm if that due course is quite early in the new year?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, all three that you mentioned are currently work in progress, so they should be completed in time to report to the next meeting of this committee, which, if memory serves me correctly, is in July.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. So I have, while asking that question, had a couple of members who do want to ask a question. I'll start with you, Councillor Duckworth, first.
Hello, thanks very much, Simon, for that presentation. Yeah, on page 25, I just wondered, with the absence management, has that changed at all because of COVID-19? And obviously, has it impacted the way absence management is recorded?
It hasn't materially changed the systems and processes, other than that East Kent HR do actively monitor details of any staff that are testing positive for COVID-19 or who are self-isolating as a result of that. But other than that, processes, referrals to occupational health, things of that nature, haven't really changed as a result of the pandemic. I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And also a question from Councillor Towning.
Yeah, thank you, Simon, for the presentation. Just reading through the paperwork that I was and looking at future audits that are going to be carried out. I note that you all are going to carry out the major audit coming up rather than the external auditor. Are you going to also invite the external auditor to join in and give their brief on the audit as well? Thank you.
We certainly liaise with the external auditors, Grant Thornton, in terms of ensuring that there is synergy between our work and theirs to avoid overlap, and also to ensure that they can place reliance upon our work. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Councillor, or if I could add anything further.
Chair,
Can I just find out on the basis? Sorry, Chair.
I was just going to try and help Councillor Towning with the Chair's permission.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure if you were referring to the audit plan for next year, which is a later item on the agenda.
Yeah. Yes.
Rather than the current year's audits.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about the audit plan for next year.
Yeah, that's the next item, I think, on the agenda.
Yes.
Okay, fair enough.
That's correct. That's correct.
I'm in a bit of a hurry, Tim.
No, that's correct. We'll raise that again on the next item. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. So, unless anyone else has got any questions, which I can't see, the recommendation here is that the report is received by members of the committee, and I'll propose that it is, and ask Councillor Dexter if he wouldn't mind seconding it, please. If he can.
Yeah, I'll second that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So unless anyone objects to that, I shall take that as approved. Thank you very much. So item 5 on the agenda is the much anticipated draft internal audit plan. And I'd like to ask Ms. Parker to introduce that, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. In accordance with the best practice, the Governance and Audit Committee should review and assess the internal audit work plan for the forthcoming year. So the purpose of this report is to help the committee through that process and to fulfil your responsibilities in terms of looking at that work plan. If I could take you to page 41, 42 of the agenda pack. The process, this is a draft plan for your input and comment, but there's a fair process that's already been undertaken to get it to the stage that it is presented to you this evening. Internal audit has, of course, its own risk assessment process. Well, it will have looked at past history, what it knows about the system and the authority. It will have looked at the corporate risk register. It will look at service plans and service risks in terms of opportunities and threats for each system to achieve its objectives. The heads of service, the directors, are then, we held meetings with them to go through any new legislation, any new systems, any big significant changes in personnel that they're aware of that may change that risk profile, and consultation then through to management team. Internal audit is a section 151 responsibility. This is some of the jargon you'll hear quite regularly in connection with internal audit. And of course, it is the section 151 officer's plan. And he must assure himself under legislation that there are resources in place to be able to provide assurance on the key risks, leading all through to the year end when we come to form our opinion. So there's all the glue that holds this together. So on a part of that risk assessment process I was describing is not only to look inwards at Thanet District Council, but also to look at the horizon in other sectors as well as local government. So the top 10 risks, as identified really through my profession, the Institute of Internal Auditors, are listed for you in section 2.3. And for each of these risks, in turn, we've considered the risk. We have looked at whether we need to make a provision in this year or in a future year, given what we know and what we've discussed with officers. There's quite a bit of detail there. I won't go through each in turn, but clearly just want you to be aware of the process. Of course, there are insufficient internal audit resources to review all areas of activity in each year, and the plan then forms its risk assessment to look at those operations. And there's a cycle of audits behind that. And the plan before you this evening covers multiple years. We're only asking members to seek approval for the forthcoming 12 months work plan. The other years are there to indicate that there is a rolling cycle to give you assurance over that period. Taking you through to 3.1 in the report, I think it's important that members are aware of the level of audit provision against the benchmark. Whilst we've only really kept up our benchmarking within Kent, the average of 400 days, Thanet compares well against the average. Which takes me to paragraph 4, where I commend the draft plan to you this evening. The recommendation, members, is for approval of the plan. The plan itself is set out on pages 47 to 52. So we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, I can't see any questions, although I think maybe we could go back to the question asked by Councillor Towning. Don't know if Councillor Towning, you want to recap on what your question was about the review.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Christine. Obviously, obviously, previously the external auditor used to carry out the audits right across the board, and you used to do your own internal audit separately. What is the thinking behind the new plan? Why are we? You're doing. I have no objection to you doing it. Don't get me wrong, but I want to know how much involvement the external auditor will have to, and have a base to actually input stuff into your audit, because they obviously know and find other things out regarding the governance and so forth. And how would that work?
Thank you for the question. My colleague indicated a level of liaison. In fact, you'll see a line in the plan for an amount of time to liaise with the external auditor. The purpose of our liaison is to ensure that we're not duplicating any effort. We would also seek to place assurance on other assurance providers. For example, you might have work undertaken for the Council by the Food Standards Agency, and that would be a year that we might seek not to look at food safety, but place reliance on their work. I did actually intend to say in my presentation, so apologies members, that this is a plan, and as with all plans, and I think 2020-21 is a good example, we do need to flex and bend and change the plan. And members will see in the item before, the quarterly update report, that changes to the plan are something that we do regularly expect. You know, things happen through the year, a higher priority piece of work may crop up and we're asked to push something back in its place. And with the council obviously taking in the East Kent housing responsibilities and forming its new housing service, we have obviously made provision for those areas, and it's possible that as the year unfolds we might be asked to do more work there at the cost of other planned work. So that kind of flex is to be expected to some extent. It is a plan based on what we know now. I think councillors, you will see from my risk assessment in terms of the risks, in terms of, like, for example, digital, cloud computing, the new home working, the new risks that the council has faced in terms of responding to unprecedented changes in last year. Some of those things we've considered, and some of those things, for example, like number 6, disaster and crisis management. We think you've probably tested your business continuity plans to the fullest extent. So some things are built in, and some things we're saying we'll delay that. I think members, you're probably also interested in risk number 10, the conduct and culture risks that go across the sector. There have been high-profile national sector headline-grabbing news, and these are. It is an area that my profession is particularly interested in developing in terms of ethics. And what we are asked to do by my profession is to look at the annual corporate governance arrangements. So typically we would break those down, and you'll see in the plan that we have provisions for anti-fraud and corruption, whistleblowing, ethics, codes and conduct, gifts and hospitality, officers code, members code, standards arrangements. So in fact, there's a report in the quarterly update report on members and standards arrangements. So a lot of these reviews aren't new. What we have proposed was to look at this in the whole, and in the consultation with management on this, the management have suggested that they approach external audit to undertake this review, upgrading the independence and part of the work that they plan to undertake. So I think hopefully that answers your question. We're not intending to duplicate anything external audit are planning to undertake. We've identified the risks. We've said why it's not in our plan, and we've obviously made the hook or pointed to the fact that it's going to be in another plan. Ultimately, this committee will need to seek assurance on those risks, and you will need to be satisfied that the assurance that you've had enables you to sign off next year's opinion. And that's really your terms of reference. Does that help?
It certainly does. Thank you. A very full answer. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, thank you for that. And you mentioned that some of this work that you might have been asked to do, or might said you were doing, is actually going to be done by the external auditor. And maybe when we get to the piece on the agenda where the external auditor presents, we can go into a bit more detail about what that piece of work is going to be and how it's going to be done. That would be very helpful then. Okay, but thank you. So there are a couple of other questions from members. Councillor Duckworth. please.
Thank you for the report, Christine. Yeah, I just wanted to, I don't know if this actually is a question for you or one of the officers, but anyway, on page 40, the sector equality duty, there's nothing ticked on there, and it says that there are no equality issues, which obviously they are important because they're mentioned in point 5 on page 42. So should something be ticked in that box to say that it's relevant?
Thank you. I think individually, our individual audits don't ordinarily lead us to tick that box. I think I would probably have to take advice as to whether that is the case when we're presenting the plan. So apologies if that's an oversight, but I think collectively tonight we're approving a plan of work which isn't uniquely linked to that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Sorry, and thank you. Councillor Boyd, please.
Thank you, Chair. Christine, thank you for your report. It was more of a comment as opposed to a question, probably more of a consideration actually. Is it worth bringing forward the planned audits for areas such as information management, so data protection, which previously had limited assurance, and then again cloud computing, digital, which is a new area and hasn't been assessed yet. I think it's because we have made this shift into sort of more home working, more digital online services. Is it more of a risk that we're going to potentially wait until 24, 25 to look at that? And potentially we could safeguard ourselves sooner by bringing it forward a little bit more. And similarly, project management was limited back in 2016-17. Presumably the government will continue to give sort of small pots of money here and there specifically for projects. Are we again putting ourselves at risk if we aren't looking at those a bit sooner, and therefore not potentially wasting money, but not being as efficient as we could do with project management?
Thank you. So in taking your points in turn, the information management, the data protection is a piece of work that is work in progress. We're trying to complete this year, which will mean that it's projected to come into the plan later. So hopefully that you'll see a piece of work coming through on that one. I'm not exactly sure what's happened on the plan that's been presented to the committee papers. The provision for 10 days for cloud computing and digital should be there. We had assessed that as being one that needed to be done this year, and that was effectively in exchange for the 10 days that's against the governance and culture review. That was an update at the last iteration of the plan. So apologies, members. The 10 days at the top of page 48 should be at the bottom of page 47. Perhaps we can note that for the approval of the plan also.
Yeah. Okay.
And project management, is in for Q3 of the new year.
Okay. Thank you. And on that note, I see Mr. Willis. Did you want to add something?
Thank you, Chair. I was a little bit confused about how the plan has been presented. It differed slightly from the version that I received when I gave my financial implications comments. I think when I saw the report, the governance and culture review made reference to the external auditor, but the one in front of us now doesn't. But it also shows there's 10 days in Q1, but Christine Parker's just indicated that that's incorrect. So I'm a little confused. What I would say is I do think that the cloud issue is important, and it's one of those that you could put off because it's such a moving target, and you could put it off until the end of the year, or you could do it at the start of the year, and I think now is as good a time as any for the reasons that Councillor Boyd has highlighted. On the governance and culture review, I suggest that the committee, and as Christine Park has highlighted, this is in part my recommendation to you, this report, that there may be discussions between external and internal audit in respect of governance and culture. An external audit would consider including it in its own audit plan for the annual accounts of the annual audits. But this is an audit plan for internal audit that we have before us. So I'd suggest that the committee take a view on when it wants a governance and culture review without being too bothered about who carries it out. If you want it carried out, you need to be clear when you want it carried out, because that's what this plan is all about.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I believe, and I'm obviously anyway, if any other members want to comment, but I think it's something that needs to be prioritised earlier rather than later in the year. So I believe it would be good to have it in to be done and started early rather than later in the year. Unless if any other members got anything, they might contradict me on that. But if not, then I'll take it that's our position.
Surely we should actually look at a period during which we should actually request the audit to be carried out rather than just leave it hanging in the air. And we should actually find a period which suits the right time of the year rather than gets confused with any other audits that may be taking place at the same time.
Yeah, well, I think my suggestion is that it is one of the first things that's done. So it's early in the year. Is that able to? So it would fit in with how the draft audit plan appears at the moment. You know, with the 10 days. Is that understandable?
Might I suggest, and this is something that obviously we'd normally have bottomed all this out with Christine, and I would have bottomed this out in advance, but because of the confusion on the appendix, the committee could say what quarter it would like the audit to be conducted in, and because there are some links to other matters that are before other committees of this council, it would be, I would suggest, wise to not start it next week or on the 1st of April, but for the committee to consider if it's not done by Q2. If you want it done early, I'd say not necessarily the first quarter, but certainly by the second quarter.
Yeah, okay, that sounds reasonable to me. If it hasn't been started by Q2, then we'll want to know why, sort of thing. I can see Councillor Curry's got a question.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was just something that came to mind regarding third-party risk regarding the non-performance of contractors. I just wondered, was there any specific areas of concern? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it is a risk that everybody's aware of. I think we've had more than one contractor fail in its performance, and that's a different risk in terms of contract management arrangements. But what we yet are to discover as normality kind of starts to come back into our contracts and the way that contractors are performing is whether they will survive the implications of whether they've had people furloughed and whether they've been able to undertake the work and get things moving once the restrictions are lifted. Even if we were to do company's house checks on all our suppliers as at today and look at the last filed accounts, it doesn't give us any certainty that their financial sustainability and that they will continue to be able to perform. So it's raising that risk that we should be very, very aware of our key suppliers who, if they were to fail, how that would impact the council's risks.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if there aren't any other questions or comments from members, I think we've discussed and proposed an amendment to the internal audit plan, in that the review of governance and culture goes into Q1, and then that's then reviewed in the next meeting. As to if it hasn't started, then we'll get a reason as to why. So that's an amended audit plan along those lines. So I'd like to propose that. And can Councillor Dexter, can you second that?
I'll second the motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. So unless I hear any objection, I shall take that as approved. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to item 6, which is the Corporate Risk Management Quarterly Update. And I'll call on Mr. Blundell to introduce that.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So this is the standard quarterly risk management update report that we bring to this committee on a regular basis. The contents of this report highlight the high priority corporate risks and describe the arrangements in place to manage and monitor them. So section 4 of the report includes a table with these key risks in them, namely political stewardship, COVID-19, cyber attack, limited resources, and Brexit. Members will observe that there's been no change to the risk scores presented in comparison to the November 2020 report. However, I should highlight the risk that was relating to EKH performance and transition that has previously been reported to the committee is no longer considered to be a key risk. As such, has been de-escalated and is no longer being reported to the committee, but still very much still being monitored and managed by officers. Beyond this, in section 5 is narrative to explain these key risks I've just highlighted, and in more detail explain the measures that have been put in place to manage them. Members are asked to review this review of the corporate risks, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Do any members have any questions at all? I've got one that I'd like to ask about, which relates to the political stewardship risk, and really it's a clarification of what exactly this is, because I know there has been discussion about this at previous one. It's mentioned in there that it's around the fact that the council is under no overall control, but there's also a statement in there about ongoing issues that could have a significant effect on the council. Could you just sort of clarify for all of our benefit, what exactly this risk does encompass?
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I'm not the risk owner for this particular corporate risk, and it was previously, as I think you stated, Tim Houser covered this off. But if I may pass this over to Ms. Culligan to answer this.
Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chair. Sorry, could you repeat the question? I know it was about the political stewardship. Is it about the level of risk?
Yeah, well, it's about the level of risk and exactly what it means, because I know we've obviously earlier been discussing with other issues. Solely the political, the fact that there's no overall control.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned that the report says because of ongoing issues. I mean, I read this risk to be purely about the issue of political control and no overall control, and so I would say it's simply because we don't have a majority party leading, so there is always the risk of certain difficulties in decision making, etc., etc. Although, however, things seem to be relatively stable, despite this. And I think the report refers to, cross-party working and efforts to make decision making, as smooth as possible, etc., etc. But I suppose in any in any council where you do have no overall control, then there is a risk. There is an inherent risk because you don't have the stability that you would have if you had, a majority party able to push through decisions, etc., etc. That's how I would explain it. And I think it's as simple as that, really. But I hope I've, if I haven't really covered off what you're asking about, then please do say.
Right. I've understood your explanation. Yeah, it's pretty binary, really, from what you're saying. If we had a party who was in overall control, this wouldn't be a high risk. But because what you're saying is because we have, it's a high risk. I see Mr. Willis.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to support what Estelle Callaghan was saying. I think right now it is what she says. It's because there's a minority administration and that presents risks. But in practice, so far, we are still functioning as a council and functioning, I think, pretty well overall, all things considered. I think some people will have been around a long time, longer than me, actually, going back to the days before 2015, when I think political stewardship and issues with political stewardship would have involved bad relationships between members and members and members and officers. I don't think that's the case now, and I don't think that's meant to be reflected in this risk score, which is why I think it's fair to say that this is related to the minority administration.
Okay, thank you very much. That's been clarified. Thank you. So if there's no other members with any questions or comments, this quarterly update is for our approval. So I shall propose that we approve that. Will Councillor Dexter, would you second that, please?
Yep, I'll second the motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So unless I hear any objection, I'll take that as approved. So that's approved. Thank you very much. Item 7 on the agenda is the 2021-2022 accounting policies. And again, this is for Mr. Blundell to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, me again. So this report presents the Council's accounting policies to be used for the forthcoming 2021-2022 financial year, and also highlights the proposed changes to the audit deadlines for this year's 2020-21 accounts. So in terms of the actual accounting policies that have been presented within Appendix 1, or Annex 1, I apologise, there are actually no significant changes to report from the accounting policies that are included in the 2019-20 accounts. However, we are reviewing housing debt write-off policy that's alongside income management. That's under current review at the moment and still to be finalised. So there may be a subsequent amendment to that policy, but we bring that to the committee's attention before approving the 2021 accounts in a year's time. In terms of the audit deadline, so the existing accounts and audit regs require us to prepare draft accounts by the end of May, and for these to be audited and approved by the end of July. A recent review conducted by Sir Tony Redmond argued that these dates are actually unrealistic and that the deadline for audit and approval of the final account should be returned to the end of September, as it was prior to the introduction of the current regs in 2015. In response to this recommendation, the government is consulting on extending the deadlines for audit and approval, and also it's expected that the draft accounts will have to be produced by the 1st of August. So the government's proposal that these arrangements will be in place for 2 years and trialled for that period of time, and then they will review them at that point. The consultation closed on the 1st of March. We're yet to hear a response, but we've been told it would be a light touch consultation, so we expect to hear a response shortly. So in terms of this report, members are asked to approve the accounting policies and also to note the change to the audit deadlines. I'm happy to take any questions on this.
Well, I haven't had any members requesting to ask a question or comment. So we shall move on to, I'll propose the acceptance of those policies. But Councillor Dexter, would you second that, please?
Yes, I'll second the motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So, unless there's any objection to that, we'll move on. That's agreed. We'll move on to the next. The next item on the agenda is the item 8, the audit findings report. And just before we move on to that, you'll remember from our previous meeting in November that the next couple of items were deferred for a couple of reasons. So just before we move on to that, I think Mr. Blundell just wants to introduce the items with an explanation about a few things.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just as a brief summary before handing over to Sarah Ironmonger to introduce her report. So as you rightly said, this report alongside the accounts themselves and the assurance statement report were deferred actually at the committee meeting in November. And this was due to accounting issues in relation to Dreamland that arose very late in the audit, and unfortunately due to the timing, we weren't able to resolve those between officers and the auditors, which meant the accounts actually couldn't be signed off at that meeting, and therefore the audit findings report couldn't be considered at that time. Through the passage of time, these issues have now been resolved, and as such, we're able to bring the accounts and the audit finding report to this meeting for the committee's consideration and approval. But I will hand you over now to Mr. Willis, so it's a bit of a relay process. He will just give you a bit more detail around the actual accounting for Dreamland before we go into Sarah's report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Don't worry, anyone. I'm not going to give a technical accounting explanation of the transactions or anything. It's just an attempt to try and, in simple terms, explain what's happened regarding Dreamland in relation to the accounts. So at the end of the year 2019-20 that these accounts relate to, the sale of Dreamland was uncertain, and the settlement of the compulsory purchase order, the CPO compensation, was the subject of ongoing negotiations and legal proceedings. When the final accounts were brought before this committee in November, the way in which we reflected Dreamland in the accounts was uncertain, so a decision on the accounts was deferred. In essence, the issues were, what should be the valuation of Dreamland as an asset in our accounts? And secondly, how much should we assume we would have to pay for the CPO compensation? Both of those issues were addressed in December. We sold Dreamland, or at least sold the park and exchanged contracts on the car park for a total of £7 million. And we reached settlement on the CPO compensation, which placed a value for that compensation of a total of £4.5 million. This figure fluctuated significantly over time based on the advice we were receiving from our external lawyers. These matters have now been resolved, and we are able to place reliable values in the accounts. The Council issued a media release and a report on these matters on our website on the 22nd of February, and the link can be included in the minutes of this meeting if it would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. Yes, and yeah, that would be helpful, please, if we could include that link. Yeah, I think it's important that we all are able to fully understand exactly what's happened with Dreamland. Thank you. So now we actually get to the bones of the item, and I'll hand over to Sarah Ironmonger. Thank you.
Thank you. And the introduction I was going to make has just been ably explained by both Chris and Tim. So I think the really positive thing is that at this point we are now in a position to be able to issue our opinion on the statement of accounts. If I can turn you to our report, just very briefly run you through in the headlines. Page 81 just gives a bit of a summary of that in fairly technical language. We are intending to issue an unqualified opinion. There is something called an emphasis of matter paragraph that we will be issuing. Now, this is a very technical thing. I think the important thing for members to note is that this is not a qualification. What this does is say that at the 31st of March 2020, your valuers for both your land and buildings, but also the property that is held within the pension fund, they issued something called a material uncertainty in their valuation. So because they did so, you have put something in your accounts to reflect that, and then we put something in our audit report which effectively draws attention to the disclosure you've put there. So yes, it's an unusual thing. Prior to March 20, these were fairly rare. They are being issued on every single 31st of March 2020 set of accounts. So it's just to help you understand what that issue is. And I think the other one on the headlines, so page 82, the value for money conclusion, we are not giving that conclusion at this point, but we can go into the detail on that as we run through the report. So those are the headlines of where we are. I think if we run through our report, we pull through the materiality, we talk about the different risks that we've looked at. Page 86 talks a bit more about how you do your revaluation of your land and buildings. And then page 87 does a little bit more about the pension liabilities and the impact of the pension fund holding pooled property investments, which again has that material uncertainty on it. Then page 88 for the next 2 or 3 pages provides a little bit more detail about the Dreamlands transaction. And so what essentially where we're coming from on this issue, and we have agreed what those figures are in the accounts, is that as at 31st of March 2020, we think that the asset needs to be classified as an asset held for sale, which absolutely is what it is. The technicality of this is if you move classifications, it changes the base of the value, and that's where a lot of these transactions happen. So that's more detail on that. And then page 89 talks about the impact on the CPO and how that's been done, with page 90 sort of just showing that this appears all over within the accounts. There's various elements of it. So it's, it is a complex transaction. It is something that is somewhat of an unusual transaction, so therefore required both the finance team and the audit team to take that step back and really understand what was going on there. So I think the rest of the report on those, there are some other findings in there, but I think it's largely bringing your attention to what has happened. And then I think at the very end, although I won't take you there now, there's a long list of adjustments that have been made. Some of these relate obviously to the transaction we've just spoken about that is very complex, but all of those have been made. So on page 99, we start on of your packs, we start on the value for money. So in 2018-19, there were 4 objections to the accounts that prevented the value for money conclusion being issued. 3 of those are now resolved, but with one ongoing. So the value for money conclusion is not able to be given for 18-19, which therefore means we cannot issue the 19-20 value for money conclusion either. But it didn't stop us doing any work on the area. There's a couple of items that we have looked at, but this work is ongoing and we will keep members updated as we progress. So turning to what we have done on the value for money, page 100, we start talking about the ongoing financial sustainability. Members will be very aware of the impact COVID has had on your the pressure it's put on your financial position. This is replicated up and down the country. All local authorities have had real pressures from it. What we are saying in this is we're looking at your arrangements. You have updated your position. You have looked at what you can and you can't do and what you can manage. You have been able to use reserves in 2021 to mitigate the in-year financial position, and that is a perfectly acceptable thing to do in the short term, but what we're saying is that's not something you can continue to do. We are giving these messages everywhere. I think when we turn to page 101, you see that what we're saying is you've got a significant challenge. I know members are aware of this. You have got a challenging financial savings plan in place, to meet the budget gaps going forward. And it's really just highlighting to you, yes, you've got those things in place, but you really need to make sure that you as a council are meeting those the plans you put in place to save, because you need to be in a position to be able to sort of replenish those reserves, and it's a difficult position, and our message is really you've got to keep a focus on it. There is another piece on page 101 where we talk about governance arrangements, which I know members had a discussion earlier on internal audit plan. So there are some matters that we are considering where we have not been able to reach a conclusion because there is another process running which needs to come to a conclusion. Where we have reached a position on is that we're going to specify the terms of reference of what we're going to look at, so that we can be very clear about what we can look at that does not impact on the parallel process that is running, and what needs to wait until a later stage, and then that will give the clarity of what we can look at this point in governance and what we can't look at. So that's what the going forward piece is. Then on page 102 we bring back in the conversation that we've been having about East Kent homes. I know that these matters have been reported to members before, and we give a summary of what's happened there. And we do recognise that the council took action promptly when these issues were brought to your attention. But what we are saying is that actually during 2018-19, because of the issues that were there, the arrangements were not sufficiently robust in 2018-19, but I think because you've taken prompt action, you've brought the service back in-house, that has progressed your arrangements forward. So that is, I think the only thing really left that I would point out is the high recommendations on page 105. So the particular one on savings identification that I spoke about, and management's put a response in there, and then the second one on accounting for complex transactions. So it is, whilst we would all hope that these complex transactions are rare, it's just a point around that. And then the rest of the action plan has sort of some other items that came up during the audit with responses from management. I will pause there and take questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So if there's anybody got any questions, then please do let me know. I haven't seen anyone asking any questions. Maybe if I ask a question or two, other members might think of one or two themselves. So you mentioned on around the monitoring of savings and the criticality of that. I mean, how closely are you, in fact, involved in monitoring that and making sure that that's happening to your satisfaction?
Okay. So I think the first step is that as the council, it's your role to identify those and to agree what those savings plans are. Management will be reporting back to you on the achievement of those, and I think what our responsibility is to review the arrangements you have in place to manage that. So therefore, we will be looking at the reports that come to you. We'll be talking to the finance team going forward as to where that progress is, what is happening within it, and that falls within our value for money process. I think the point we're making about your arrangements is it's really important that members are clear on where that progress is, and not with all the other issues that a council like Thanet has to manage. It's not forgotten in all of that. There's nothing, we're not saying at the moment that we've got any concerns about the arrangements, but Mr. Willis may want to come in here and explain a bit more about the arrangements you've got.
I believe he does. Yes, Mr. Willis.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Sarah. I don't want to go through the financial management arrangements we have in place. Rather, I just wanted to sort of point out that probably members are bored with me constantly saying that we have very low reserves and we have little resilience, but we're doing the best we can, and we need to do what we say we're going to do and not do what we say we're not going to do. And I know every year the external audit says that you have very challenging medium-term financial strategy, there's lots of savings to deliver, and it's going to be difficult. I agree wholeheartedly with that view from the external audit. On the other hand, I would say if you look at sort of other outcomes, CITFA releases a financial resilience index every year, which sort of does a collection across all the country as to how financially resilient each local authority is. It's true, if you look at that, you will find that Thanet has low levels of reserves relative to other districts, locally as well as nationally. And that has always been the case ever since I've been here in the last 6 years. What it does also show, though, is that year on year, we're improving our position. Now, COVID will have had an impact on that, as it will have done on all local authorities. But up to 1920, it shows that year on year, we've improved our level of reserves, against our net revenue expenditure. And we've actually also improved our balance sheet position. We've paid down debt and we've improved our level of equity. So we're edging in the right direction, albeit very slowly and albeit with an underlying low level of reserves, which is a constant financial risk and challenge to us.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that explanation. Because I asked, how closely are you monitoring these sort of things? I guess I should state it's incumbent on us members to be fully involved in these decisions and discussions as well, and do that.
Yeah. And I think just to sort of amplify what Tim said is, so the conversations that Tim and I have is actually, how resilient are you if there's another shock to the sort of financial position of local authorities, and it's that piece you need to continue to be really alert to.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, I do have a question now from Councillor Towney.
Hi, Sarah. I'm going to start with where Tim has left off. That was going to be my last question, actually, to you, but I've got other questions I want to raise, okay? In your report, you talk about unsustainable levels of reserve. I mean, what would you call an unsustainable level of reserve? The other thing is this, that you also point out that during the period of 22-23, that we're going to start to replenish our reserves. Now, I appreciate what you're saying, but I mean, what evidence has, Tim and Chris do a phenomenal job for the council. What evidence have you got to base that statement on? Can you just explain those 2 points firstly to me?
Okay, so on page 101, what I'm saying is you have used reserves to meet the pressures that have come from COVID, and we're not in any way criticising you for that. What we are saying that is, if you repeated that and you repeatedly rely on reserves without taking action to address the underlying budget position, then that leads to the risk that either reserve levels become unsustainable, or you have to take rapid service cuts to maintain a sustainable position. We're not saying that's the position you're in. We're saying that that is the risk if you continue to need to go into reserves to support your position. So we're not saying you've done that. We're saying there's a risk if you went down that route.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Towney, did you have another question?
And what evidence do you have to actually establish that we will be in a position 22-23 to replenish the reserves that we've dipped into to balance our budget? I mean, what has the council provided you with?
So we have looked at the medium-term financial strategy, and we've had conversations with both Tim and Chris on that to reach that. That's what your plans currently are saying.
Okay, thank you. And just before I come back to you, Councillor Thanet, I think Tim Willis wanted to say something.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And it's often the case that members at Governance and Audit comment on the auditor's findings on our medium-term financial strategy. And actually, it makes me think that Chris and I should consider bringing the draft medium-term financial strategy to Governance and Audit Committee in future years, because I think it provides a better context. What I would say is that we do have an objective to increase reserves, to start replenishing reserves from the year after next, I think it is. I would also say that in a strange way, we sort of have already started it, because during the year, we were hit by COVID and we realised that we would have a big hit, a big one-off hit. It's not to say that there isn't an ongoing impact of COVID over a number of years, but certainly back in the summer, it was a one-off hit. And we estimated that was going to cost us £3 million. So we went to Cabinet and then we went to Council, and Council agreed to find that £3 million of reserves to fund the overspend caused by COVID-19. And I thought that was a very important moment for the Council to recognise that it had to make tough decisions in year to deal with those sorts of problems. I think as time passed, we've now begun to realise that the government has provided emergency COVID funding, which we hadn't been expecting. COVID has still hit us hard, and it will hit us hard next year as well. But actually, the situation isn't as bad now as we thought it was going to be back in the summer, which led to the Council decision in September to use £3 million worth of reserves. Some of this is explained in the budget report and the medium-term financial strategy reports that went to Cabinet and Council in February. So I think we sort of have begun to see that although we did take a big hit in year because of COVID, since then things have improved a little bit, and that improvement we are holding within our reserves. So we've got some flexibility entering 21-22 and beyond to start releasing those reserves as they are needed, as we see the impact of COVID play out in the next couple of years.
Okay, thank you for that. I think Councillor Townley, did you have anything else? Yeah.
Sorry, Sarah.
No.
You might think I'm on your case or something, you know. It's not like that, I promise you. You've implemented a report on the port of Ramsgate. And this goes back quite a while. Do you know when this report's going to be concluded? Because, you know, the Ramsgate port is a very important element for future income and generating jobs and so on and so forth for the area. And I just wondered where you are with that report.
So because my predecessor received that objection, my predecessor is working through that. I understand that he is in regular contact with Chris, who's responding to our information requests, and I understood it is nearing a conclusion. I don't know whether, Chris, you've got a more up-to-date position on that?
Yes, it is. It is nearing conclusion, but I wouldn't want to give a definitive answer at the moment until it's over the line.
Okay. Thank you. Over the line.
Sorry, Sarah.
Yeah, the auditor, so my colleague has to finalise what our conclusion on the objection is. So I think we're it's very close to reaching that point, but there are a number of, because it's a statutory power, there's a number of statutory processes to go through where we will issue a draft response to the objector, and they have to have time to respond to that. So there is just a piece on that I think that's the piece that Chris is referring to.
Forgive my ignorance, you know. Just the other thing that I just want to talk to you about is that 1920, years 19 and 20, objections were raised about non-disclosure settlements that were made. Now, I do appreciate that there is the IDSC, and you have touched on this matter where other issues are being dealt with and so on and so forth. However, the ISDC, the ISSC is in progress. I mean, are you in communication with Councillor Saunders to see where we are going and how we are going to deal with these objections about the non-disclosure matters?
I have been in contact with the external legal counsel that the council has used, and I'm very happy to meet with Councillor Saunders as part of continuing that work. So we have had updates on, in principle, where that committee is going, but obviously not in detail, because that is not something that I would want to be. It's not something the external auditor would need to be involved in. It is your process that you need to be running. We need to allow you to run that process and then comment on it. So that is that's our position on it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to have asked you all those questions.
Never be sorry for asking a question.
No, questions are good.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, I think that covered something else I wanted to ask as well. So that's great. I'll give everyone else another chance if they want to ask any further questions on that. I shall move on. I think this report has been presented to us for information.
So, Chair, technically you need to consider our findings on the audit before you ask members to vote on approving the statement of account. So that's the technicality of it.
Okay, all right. So we need to consider that and not approve it here.
When you come to your item 10, it will be about
item 10. Exactly. Sorry, getting a bit out of sync there. Thank you for the clarification. Right. So we'll move on to the item 9 on the agenda, which is the Audit Committee Assurance Statement, which I'll ask again Mr. Blundell to introduce this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so in terms of this report and the statement, to comply with auditing standards, the external auditor, so Sarah, needs to establish an understanding of the management processes in place to detect fraud and to ensure compliance with laws and regulation. The external auditor is also required to make inquiries of management as to our knowledge of any actual suspected or alleged fraud. The external auditor also needs to gain an understanding of how this committee, the Governance and Audit Committee, maintains an oversight of those above processes. So these exact requirements are detailed in a letter from Grant Thornton in Annex 1 to this report that was addressed to the previous committee chair, Councillor Day. And then the response to those questions set out in that letter is set out in Annex 2. So the response was prepared by myself in consultation with yourself, Chair, and also the Chief Executive and Estelle Culligan, Director of Law and Democracy. However, it should be noted that it's a requirement for the response to come from the Chair of the committee and not an officer. And therefore, the committee needs to be assured that the information submitted to the external auditor is sufficiently robust for your purposes. And members are invited to comment on the response if they so wish.
Thank you. So thank you for that. Do any members have any comment or question about that? If not, then I do need a proposer. So I'll propose that we approve that response from me. And I'll ask Councillor Dexter if you could please second that.
Yes, I'll second this motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So, unless I hear any objection, I'll take that as approved. Right, no objection. Thank you. So, finally, item 10, the statement of accounts. And again, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Blundell. This is the one we've been looking forward to.
It is indeed. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is the showstopper. So as kind of referred to previously, this report, alongside a couple of others, was initially tabled at the meeting on the 25th of November for approval. However, because of those issues surrounding Dreamland and the accounting associated with, they were deferred. That deferral meant that the accounts were not approved by the end of November in accordance with the statutory deadline. However, it's important to sort of note and stress that in missing the November target date, we didn't break any laws, but we did have a requirement, and we met that, to publish a statement on our website explaining why the accounts had not been published on time. It should also be sort of noted that TDC is not alone in this situation. More than half of local authorities have not been able to meet this deadline, particularly due to the stresses and requirements of having to undertake the completion of the account and the audit of them remotely due to the pandemic. So turning to the accounts themselves, those members you will have seen, they are very lengthy. I expect you found them complex and possibly hard to understand in certain parts. In fact, Sir Tony Redmond, in his review, he recommended that a number of ways for local authority accounts to be simplified and measures to improve their accessibility and transparency. And that's something that the government is considering, but obviously won't be in place for the accounts that you're looking at now and for accounts that we'll be preparing for 2021. I certainly don't propose that we go through all 150 pages of the accounts. We'd be here for a little while longer. The cover report sets out some of the key messages. I'll just highlight those. They're set out in section 2 of the cover report. Namely that when you look at our comprehensive income and expenditure statements, that's equivalent to a profit and loss account for a private company. It shows that we had a £42 million net cost of services. This included, though, a £19.5 million valuation change due to Dreamland that we kind of referred to earlier. And almost all of that £42 million net cost of services, they were adjusted out to non-usable reserves. And when I say non-usable reserves, those are reserves that are in place to capture movement in the likes of valuation of assets and liabilities, such as property and pensions, and other sort of timing issues that are required due to statutory requirements. And as such, they didn't actually have a cash impact on our usable reserves. And when you strip those adjustments out, our net usable reserves actually increased by £678,000 in a year to a gross total of £48 million. That £48 million sounds like quite a significant figure when we've often referring to how low our balances and reserves are, but it's only 13.5 million that relates to the general fund reserves and balances, which saw £1 million increase in the year. The rest of that 48 million is actually specifically attributed to the HRA or capital receipts. Continue just to focus on the general fund, as Tim has already covered off today. Our general fund reserves and balances are low relative to other authorities and district councils of the like, and we've reported that position previously. It should also be noted that that £1 million increase is pre-COVID, and we are expecting to, as Tim has already said, be taking money out of reserves this year to combat them. What else? In terms of the balance sheet itself, we have, sorry, I've just lost my place on the page of my notes. The council's overall net worth reduced during the year from £196 million to £178 million. That was a decrease of £8 million. That was mainly, as I was referred to earlier, due to the reclassification of Dreamland. But in addition to that, there was also an increase in our pension liability from to £90.4 million. But these are all issues that don't have an immediate effect on the council's financial position. So members are asked to approve the accounts as has been reported in Annex 1, but also note the letter of representation from management that is included at Annex 2. I'm happy to take any questions on the accounts.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. I don't have anyone wanting to ask a question or make a comment at the moment. So I shall thank you for that, for presenting them to us, and move on to propose that we do in fact approve the statement of account and note the letter of representation, and ask Councillor Dexter if he wouldn't mind seconding that, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So unless I hear any objection, I'll take that as approved. So that is approved. Thank you. So we're coming towards the end of the meeting. There's no more items on the agenda. Just before concluding, I'd just like to thank everybody for attending the meeting this evening. And I'd especially like to thank the officers and those from internal audit and external audit for your work producing and presenting those reports to us. So that concludes the business for tonight's meeting. I declare the meeting now closed at 6:20 p.m. Thank you again for all of you for participating, and thanks to everybody who watched at home.